Hi, we're often asked how to break up a pu'er tea cake, so we want to make this video demonstrating just how to do that. All you need is the cake itself, some sort of tray or shallow dish to catch the leaves and the broken bits in, and a pu'er knife. If you don't have a specific pu'er knife, don't worry. You can just use anything with a flat edge to it, allowing you to pry into the cake, like a letter opener, or we even brought this small chisel as another example. It's important to know why to break up a cake, because you certainly don't need to. In fact, if you're going to store your cake for a long period of time, then it's better to leave it in its whole cake form. But if you've decided you want to drink it in a relatively short time, say a year or two, it can be a really good idea to break up the entire cake and store it in a jar. This will increase its surface area, and in a very short period of time, in about 2 weeks to a month, it will oxidize much more uniformly, making for a more balanced cup of tea. Before you begin, do remember to wash your hands thoroughly with unscented soap and dry them well. Tea is very absorbative. Remember, tea cakes come in all different shapes and sizes, so for this video we wanted to use the Global Tea at May Tea of the Month called Inner Resolve. It was stone pressed and is therefore less compressed and more easy to break into than a machine pressed pu'er tea cake. I'm going to demonstrate breaking into the pu'er tea cake, coming in from the outside edge, working my way around the perimeter, and essentially dividing the cake into its two halves. So I'm ready, I've got my knife, and I'm going to demonstrate coming in from the top edge here. When you're at this point, what you're looking for is a spot on the edge of the cake that gives into the pressure from the knife. If you find yourself using too much force, that's not the right spot. So you have to kind of pry around, push a little bit, find the right spot that gives to the pressure, and then insert as much as it allows. And essentially you're just going to keep doing this until you work your way all the way around. So here I've found a spot that's not giving into the pressure, so it's not the right spot. So I'm going to reposition. This is now much easier, and I go in as much as I can. Do be careful at this point, because even though the knife isn't sharp, it does have a pointed edge, and you don't want to hit your hand that's holding the cake. It's not a particularly fast process, so be patient and work your way around. One thing we're trying to do is to break the tea leaves as little as possible, or to maintain the whole leaves as much as possible. So I've come all the way around, but it's not ready yet. You'll probably have to make a second pass, opening the cake up even more before you can divide it into its two halves. But it will go a lot easier the second or third time around. And you'll really feel it breaking into its two halves. All right, and that was it. So there, this cake's been broken into its two halves. So at this point, now what we want to do is continue breaking it down into smaller pieces. And again, we really want to do as little damage to the tea leaves as possible and preserve the whole leaves as much as possible. And it's really quite easy at this point. I'm going to take the thinner half first, and all you really want to start doing is bending the cake back and forth, very, very gently. What you don't want to do, and I'll demonstrate just for this video, is to just break off a piece, and what you get is this really flush edge with broken tea leaves. So we don't want to do that. Instead, what you can do is start to pry, very gently bend the cake back and forth. And what you'll notice, which I can start to see here, is there's a break line. And I'm going to keep working it along that break line really gently, and it'll slowly start to come apart. And if you pull really gently, what you're going to notice are all of these whole leaves sticking off the edge. And that's what you want. And so essentially with this piece as well, I'm going to break it down a little bit more. And I'm working it until I feel that break line. And I'm going to keep working along that, slowly prying it. And you'll notice all these beautiful whole tea leaves. This is great. This is exactly what you want. And so essentially you want to do this with both halves until it's completely finished. Sometimes these pieces are easier than others, and sometimes you have to work at it a little bit more. Like here, for example, it's a little more compressed, so I have to be a little more patient, find the break line. Here it is. And then just slowly pull it apart. You have to work at this one a little bit more. You might need to rotate it and pry it. Now on the other half, you'll notice it's actually much more compressed in this dimple here, which is where the paper was pressed into the tea cake. And at that point, you may even need to go back and use your Puerh knife again to re-pry the more compressed piece into smaller pieces, and that's fine too. Usually the break line will develop around that dimple as you're working on this larger half. Lots of whole tea leaves in there, and you can see it's going to start to break all the way around this compressed part. Really, you're trying to listen to the tea and find out where it wants to break to maintain all those whole tea leaves. Once you've finished, you'll probably have tea leaves all over the place. Don't worry, it's a bit of a messy process, and like all tea skills, it requires practice and patience to develop, which is even more important when you're working with a more tightly compressed cake or a machine-pressed Puerh tea cake, which will require even more time to find that spot that gives around the edge and even more patience. You might also notice you have lots of tea leaf bits at the bottom of your tray. That's okay, don't worry, it's impossible to avoid. They're even useful when you're brewing tea because those small bits will lend themselves to more flavor, aroma, and energy in the initial steepings, whereas the chunks of Puerh cake will require at least a few infusions to fully open up. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.